Thanks very much. I'd like to thank all the other speakers. They were very inspirational and very informative. I remember once I was under the lights for the CBC. I had to do a talk, and when the lights came on, they asked me what was my opinion on the subject. I said, I have no idea. So they all rushed and they powdered me up, and they turned the lights off and turned them on again, and they said, what's your opinion about this? I said, I'm really not sure. Sometimes lights can do that to you. But this is a kind of a thing about how I started out as a writer. And so, I mean, I'm just going to read it, but, you know, Churchill saw Beaverbrook writing one time and said, what are you doing? He said, I'm writing. He said, what are you writing about? He said, me. Churchill said, that's great. I've been writing about me for 50 years with excellent results. So, this is not really about me. It's about Dostoevsky's statement that beauty can save the world, and I'll try to explain what I mean by that, or what he meant by that when I read this. I suppose I could say my life was easier than most. That would be a true enough statement here. I certainly will never have to endure what those many of us with muscular dystrophy have had to. And I'm sure that nothing that has happened to me is too strange or abnormal. And I would never be so conceited as to imply that I had one night of hardship like many of you in this room. Still, I think I know something about one thing, and that is that true beauty overcomes all in any hardship. That is, as Dostoevsky says, beauty will save the world. And each of us should reflect on what he means by this. When I decided to be a writer, it was so long ago it feels like another age, and in many respects was another age. So long ago we only had one channel on the television, and that was the CBC, a network which by and large did not even know New Brunswick existed, or if it did, existed in some alternate world where the dialogue and the clothes were so funny and out of fashion as to render mute our aspirations. That is, I came from a world which did not really exist in real time and place. The real time and place was somewhere else, I suppose, and we were continually being told that it was. And yet, it was the world that by the age of 14 I was determined to write about. Firstly, because it was the only world I knew. I did not know any other world. And when I caught the other world in glimpses out of the corner of my eye, I saw it to be not one iota more conscious of greatness or pain than our world. And secondly, because the world I knew needed to be celebrated in all its tragic longing and hope, not to rehabilitate this world for those from other places who at times made light of it, but to make this world triumphant in its own eyes, to show that our world's parameters were in fact the universe itself unbounded, yes, and at times as fragile in its humanity as Icarus flying outward toward the sun. But I will confess I did not know this is what I was attempting to do when I was a boy of 14, or that this would be my life's work, and that this work would become my only testament, the only way that I could express my love not only for this place, but for humanity no matter in what guise it tramped, and that this work would have unfortunate and on occasion terrible consequences for myself and those I did love, those few who chose to stick with me through thick and thin. I, of course, did not know this then at 14. At 14, I only knew I wanted to write some stories, and I felt I had some stories I could tell about both heartache and bravery and love. And you might think I was too young to do so. Well, you would be right, excepting for one solitary thing, triumphant in the human spirit, and that is that experience does not come from the amount of time one lives, but comes from an instinct for life. So I set about doing it, that is, writing my stories with relentlessness that caused consternation to everyone around me, who told me that I could not do it, and even some, and there were teachers and educators who said this too, that it must not be done. That if someone were to do something, it should not be spontaneous or reckless, but moderate and considerate, and done with foresight and meticulous planning, all of those very things I myself was no good at all. And so I realized that to continue to do so would alienate me from those very educators who I once believed knew something about the reasons a man or woman would stake their health and well-being, and sometimes their entire lives and reputations on a poem. For yes, those certain teachers could tell us this and marvel at it in a class as Keats and Thomas and Browning, but they themselves so often could not do it themselves, and in the end feared anyone who could or who would try. So then from the time I was old enough to know what I wanted to do or must do, I was also alone in the world I did it in, unaware that this would be a condition of my life for years. That when I met Peg that November night long ago and told her I was going to be a writer, I would condemn her to poverty too. But that in the end I had no choice at all, and that is when I began to realize that choice in the world is really a sham, that there is always a choice, of course, but there is in the world for all of us only one way. And to neglect this way is to neglect who we are supposed to be, no matter what comes of it. And that this way, and here's the secret, no matter how false and stupid and mean all of us, and I myself, can manage to be, this way is to exclaim and produce and manifest one thing only, and that is, of course, bravery and love. For here's another secret, there can never be one without the other. That is, bravery without love is not brave, and love without bravery is not love. And this is what I suspected even at a young age was the secret of the human heart and why I wanted to write about it. But even then I had an inkling that I must try to write about more than this, that I must try to show how much is set against this kindness and bravery and love, how much convention and terror is set against it, and we at times are our own worst enemies in this, and to do things against our better natures that oppose these better angels and oppose ourselves as well, and that in our opposition to ourselves is our very ruin. There was opposition even by myself for this, for I asked, why should I do this? I can still get a degree and teach at a university and be happy, and perhaps they are right, maybe they are, and I am sure I can be happier at a university than alone. Yet in the end, for me to take another way, or even to think there might be another choice, as many people told me there was and had to be, and that not to follow their mandate for a safe and secure life was apostate to their common sense, I still gave up anything and everything to do with anything else, and with $100, my wife and I were married 1 year long ago. We moved into one room after we were married, and there I began my first novel. We had a cot to sleep on, a hot plate for a stove, and the bathroom was 2 flights up, and I worked at our table at night with a portable typewriter. And then we moved to an apartment where the boys would drink wine on the steps outside and have entertaining fistfights in the street, where 2 or 3 families lived above us and squabbled, and our mail was rifled through to see if we were getting any money. Unfortunately for all concerned, we weren't. But I finished my first novel in that long ago apartment, the apartment gone now many years ago, before we moved again, and I started another book. It was the first of many moves over a lifetime of moves, always carrying that portable typewriter, and each book that came seemed to disappoint so many people. It seemed those old educators and teachers I once had were right, and that my work and my life was doomed. So then from my first book on this subtle and elaborate condition of man, the inner struggle for humanity and courage against the opposing nature in ourselves, was going to damn me with faint praise and confuse and confound and even enrage my critics, of which for the first 20 years of my writing career rose exponentially with each and every book. We lived in one apartment furnished with a card table bought at the Salvation Army, and later we sold our 20-year-old car to pay the rent. And that was the day a friend of mine was hired at St. Mary's as a full professor. It seemed I had made the wrong choice. And there were certain of those, and weak men and women they were too, who celebrated my failure and rejoiced in our poverty, for human beings are what they are, and we must know this in ourselves, and so I write about it tonight without complaint. How friends with salaries and pensions and workaday rules rejoiced in the hopeful decimation of a career and a work they at times did not understand and never read. But that is nothing more than the way of the world and should be seen as only that. I suppose looking back at it, I was too proud to give up and too obsessed to think of any other way to live. And looking back, my wife too had much faith in me to leave, though she must have been tempted to many times. And so when I think of those long ago writing days, I suppose I think of faith most of all. For it is faith that we cling to when the world deserts us. And I come to the heart of my talk now. The world will desert us. And none of us know not when or how it will. So the faith we had in those turbulent years is what all of us have in bravery and love at our core. Because I want to mention something, and it is this. Never can we be sure that the comfort we now have at this moment will last a moment longer. And if this is the case, then something other and far greater than comfort must be manifested in our lives, and it has to be the courage to be resilient against the odds. At times there is no greater flaw in man than that of wanting and needing to belong. But in the end, we can never belong to anything more important than our own integrity. So now I will end my talk with the comment from the Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It comes when Dmitri and his brother Elisha are meeting in the garden. Dmitri says that the devil and Christ fight for souls of the earth, and the weapons they use are beauty. A very strange statement, for how can this be, that the devil and Christ use the same weapon? But I will tell you the weapons are beauty, and yet they are entirely different. When British Prime Minister Chamberlain went to visit Mr. Hitler for the second time in 1938, he spoke, and so did all the reporters assembled, speak of the beauty of the Nazi flags, the noble-looking SS stormtroopers with their shining black helmets and white gloves, the rolling hills with the swastikas looking like poppies, and the wonderful martial music playing while dazzling blue-eyed children frolicked in the street, carrying flowers and plums and golden ripe oranges in the sun. Prime Minister Chamberlain himself was utterly seduced by this beauty and could not imagine a regime so splendid, so magnificent, ever doing anything wrong. It was, of course, the Munich crisis of 1938 and the attempted appeasement of Mr. Adolf Hitler. 3.5 years later, the great Russian city of Leningrad was under siege, and stormtroopers had surrounded it, bombing it with planes and tanks and large 88 cannons. There was no way out of that city of the dead during those days, and only one way in. In late December of that year, 1941, a lorry driver was pacing up and down, waiting in minus 30-degree temperature for one thing only, for Lake Ladoga to freeze deep enough so he could use it as the only way in. And why did he wish to go into that desperate city, living through the darkest days of the war without water or electricity or hope of any kind? He wanted to drive his lorry across that ice for one reason and one reason only, to bring some oranges to the children trapped in Leningrad for Christmas. And though he was told not to chance it, never to chance it, told he was insane to try, he decided he could not wait any longer, and went into the dark wind-swept ice and made it across by himself. A man delivering crates of oranges to children across that unsafe and dreadful lake, that one safe route surrounded on all sides by death, is, I believe, the great beauty, greater than all the other beauty in the world combined. And of course, we know this, for it is reflected in the greater vision of ourselves. It is what I have always tried to say in my work, at least. It is the beauty we stake our lives on when the world turns against us and the comfort of the moment is gone. It is the terrible beauty of a humble courage that men and women share and know in the end to be the only thing ever true. And here's the secret. No one on earth, from Caesar to Hitler, and no matter how many flags and banners waving like poppies in the sun, could ever match or take that beauty away. Thank you.